Daf Yomi tractate Bava Metzia 11b. We'll start from the bottom of 11a, just to keep the idea from the start of the idea. There was an incident. This is bottom of 11a, last line. Rabbi Bava raised an objection to Ula from that which is taught in the Mishnah in Maser Sheni 5:9. There was an incident involving Rabban Gamliel and other elders who were traveling on a ship. Since he remembered that he had not tithed the produce of his fields, Rabban Gamliel said to the others, 1/10 of my produce, which I will measure out in the future and separate from my produce, is given to Yehoshua ben Hananiah, who is a Levite and is entitled to receive the first tithe. Top of 11b, with the words Umakomo Muskar Lo, and the place of the tithe is rented to him. Rabbi Yehoshua paid him a token sum to rent the field, which presumably became the equivalent of his courtyard, and thereby acquired the tithe. And another 1/10 that I will measure out in the future and separate from my produce as the poor man's tithe is given to Akiva ben Yosef, so that he will acquire it for the poor, and its place is rented to him. Rabbi Bava continued, but were Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva standing next to Rabbi Gamliel's field then? All of them were on the ship. Apparently, one's courtyard affects acquisition for him even when he is not standing next to it. Ula said to him, This one of the sages seems like one who had not studied halacha. Ula dismissed the question entirely, as he deemed it unworthy of consideration. When Rabbi Bava came to Surah, he related the discussion to the local scholars, saying to them, This is what Ula said, and this is how I challenged him. One of the sages said to him, Rabban Gamliel transferred ownership of the movable property, the tithes, to them by means of renting them the land. The transaction concerning the tithes was effected not by causing the location of the produce to become the equivalent of a courtyard belonging to Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva, but rather by employing the principle that movable property can be acquired together with the acquisition of land. The Gemara comments, Rabbi Zera accepted this response to Rabbi Abba's objection, but Rabbi Abba did not accept it. Rava said Rabbi Abba did well by not accepting this response, because if Rabban Gamliel had intended to transfer his ownership of the tithes to Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva, did they not have a cloth with which to acquire the tithes from him by means of a symbolic exchange? They could have acquired the tithes through symbolic exchange without renting the land. Rather, clearly, the tithes were not considered the property of Rabban Gamliel, as he owned only the benefit of discretion, meaning the benefit accrued from the option of giving the tithes to whichever Levite or poor person that he chose, and such benefit is not considered property that can be acquired by means of a symbolic exchange. Here, too, the transaction was clearly effected by means of a courtyard, as benefit of discretion is not property that can be acquired by means of acquiring land. Therefore, Rabbi Abba's explanation must be correct, and one's courtyard affects acquisition for him even when he is not standing next to it. The Gemara rejects Rava's reasoning, but that is not so with regard to gifts to which members of the priesthood are entitled, and similarly with regard to tithes that are given to Levites and to the poor. The concept of giving is written in the Torah, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, and to the fatherless, and to the widow, Deuteronomy 26:12. These gifts must be given and not be sold or bartered. Therefore, since exchange is a form of buying and selling, it is an inappropriate mode of acquisition with regard to tithes. By contrast, transferring ownership of movable property by means of transferring ownership of land is a powerful form of giving. Consequently, Rabban Gamliel could not give them the tithes by means of a symbolic exchange using a cloth, but instead had to give it to them along with land. Since the transaction was not effected by means of a courtyard, it poses no difficulty to Ula's opinion. Rav Papa said, even if Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva acquired the tithes by means of a courtyard, this poses a difficulty. This poses no difficulty to Ul's opinion, since the tithes were not ownerless items, but rather another mind. Meaning Rabbi Gamliel transferred the ownership to Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva is different, and the recipients did not need to stand next to the courtyard. And from where do you state this distinction? As we learned in the Mishnah, if one saw people running after a found ownerless animal and said, "My field has affected acquisition of this animal for me, and it has affected acquisition it has affected acquisition of it for him." Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Rabbi Yochanan says that this halacha is true only in a case where he would be able to run after them and catch them. And Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a dilemma. Does one acquire animals that are not given to him as a gift in such a scenario? Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana accepted the premise of the dilemma of Rabbi Yirmiyah and ruled that in the case of a gift, one acquires the animals even if he would not be able to run after them and catch them. What is the reason for this distinction? Is it not because when another mind transfers their ownership, the halacha is different, in that the courtyard affects acquisition of the items with fewer limitations? This supports Rav Papa's explanation. Rav Shimi said to Rav Papa, but what about the case of a bill of divorce, where another mind, the husband, transfers its ownership to the wife? And nevertheless, Ula says, with regard to one who threw a bill of divorce into his wife's house or courtyard, but if it is a valid divorce only if she is standing next to her house or next to her courtyard, Rav Papa responded, a bill of divorce is different, as it is possible to give it to one's wife even against her will. Rav Sheshet, the son of Rav Edi, objects to this response. But is it not an a fortiori inference if, in the case of a bill of divorce, which is valid, even if it is given to the wife against her will, nevertheless, if she is standing next to her house or next to her courtyard, she does acquire the bill of divorce, and if she does not acquire it, then in the case of a gift which one can receive only willingly, is it not all the more so correct that the recipient must be next to his courtyard for the transaction to take effect? Rather, Rav Ashi said that the distinction between the cases of a gift and a bill of divorce should be explained as follows. To be continued.